Welcome to class. The topic we have today is functions that have variable number of arguments. There's one thing I'll be letting you know is that some people get confused with reading some C++ code. You are not going to get confused. I'm telling you to just memorize it. Some examples that you find on the web would have this equal sign here and assigned a constant value to them. But this is not allowed in C. Practically, this is wrong. This is wrong in C. So, what you do is, for creating variable number of arguments, you will have to use an operator, a special operator. If that operator is called ellipsis notation. 3 dots. Ellipsis notation, okay? For that, we'll be needing to see some examples of how this has been implemented in standard library functions that we use already, but we did not pay any attention to. Let's take this printf function. In we pass it any number of arguments. For example, we say 5 next variable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So if this printf would have been defined with 5 arguments here, we wouldn't be able to pass the 6th argument. But as we know, printf allows unlimited number of arguments. We keep passing to it and it does accept them. So how do we implement this printf kind of behavior in our C functions and take variable number of arguments? In the future, you will be encountering in upcoming lectures, you will see sprintf, for example, and then you will come up with fprintf, etc. These are also examples of same implementation of ellipsis notation. How do we do that? Let's take our function and remove the comments and try to implement it. Now, the thing is, your function should be able to know the number of arguments that have been passed to it. For that, from the beginning, you will be trying to calculate the number of arguments that have been passed. If you just pass the ellipsis notation, you won't be able to calculate the number of arguments that have been passed to it. So the best idea would be having an integer called n or something, maybe for the counting, how many number of arguments are being followed here. We just zoom in and explain it to you. So the first argument is going to be the number of arguments that are being passed to this function, and then followed by all the arguments. If the n is 7, and so the next upcoming 7 arguments will be passed to it, and of any type. These arguments can be casted to any type that you defined previously. Just like in the printf function, if you pass %d, the upcoming argument is automatically casted to an integer. If you pass %e or f or lf, then it is casted to a rational number. You pass %s, then upcoming argument is casted to a string. So let's see the implementation. First, remove this source code that we have previously here and start to implement the variable list from here. So what we are creating this sum function for is number of arguments, n number of arguments that are going to be passed here, and the sum is going to get returned. So we say our return type is integer, and that is the result. It should be 0 by default in the beginning. The very special thing that you have to do is, how do we come to realize and find, because none of the variable names are here. How would we access them? that, you will have to use stdarg first. Yeah, you just include stdarg, standard arguments. Okay, so you will have to include the standard arguments, and then you have to create a variable of data type called va underscore list, and this should be named as arguments or any variable of your choice. Then you will have a starting point, which I said earlier. You will have a starting point. This is our starting point. We'll have to let the compiler know that this is the starting point of the arguments, where arguments start. So we will use a function called va underscore start. And within that, we'll have to pass the very first, we'll have to pass the va list, this argument, and the variable. And our variable, the very first variable, is n. So the compiler will come to know that this is the very first argument. It should start finding the rest of the arguments from, or base the number of arguments on this. We'll create a loop. For example, we say int I is equal to 0, I is less than n. That means we are creating a loop which will iterate till number of n, number n, in I plus plus. Okay, so here comes the magic. We have to now cast one argument. We have to cast one argument. Let's try doing that and then assign it or add it back to the variable that we have called result. So we assume that every next value that is coming from here is an integer. So what we do is we call yet another function from the standard argument library, stdarg. And now the very first thing you need to pass is the list. And then from the list, you want this value, next upcoming value, to be casted back to the type of your choice. Expecting an integer here. So this is going to return us an integer. What we do is we'll just add this integer to, for example, we say v, and then we add it to plus equals to v, which means, if you remember, I'll just revise it for you. res is equal to res plus v. The same statement. So this has been added to it, and get rid of this temporary variable and pass it here. Fine enough. So what happens here is the list actually starts here. And then we have one variable argument, next upcoming argument. You see, we don't pass any index. We pass the list here, which has been declared here. This is the list, and this is being passed here. And the data type that we need to cast our next upcoming argument to. So what we do is, because it's just one statement, we remove all this till here. And then we just return the result. But before that, whenever you have started walking over the arguments list, you need to end. You need to let the system know that the argument list has just been completed. So you will just call the function va end. I'll repeat, va start and va end. These are the two parts, va start and va end. Between them, you will do whatever you want to do with all the arguments that are upcoming arguments, and we are determining the number of arguments from the variable passed n first. So these values are being gathered by and casted by va arg function, and after the start, you have to end on the. That's it. Let's call this function and try to get its value. Sum of, we say we need sum of 5 integers. We say 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Like that. Okay, let's try it. If it does compile, fine enough, we'll get the value and print it out. Okay, it did compile perfectly. Congratulations. We'll say, we'll create a variable, int the result is equal to 0 or nothing maybe. And then we'll assign the result of the sum. We say, okay, we have 5 integer values that are to be passed to this function, or maybe variables. You say int x and y. If x is equal to 1 and y is equal to 2, for example, we pass them here, x and y. And you can add 2 further values. For example, you say 9 and 8 also being passed here, and then you count these arguments. 5 plus 2 is 7 arguments, so we'll change it to 7. And then we will print out the result that we have, the function has calculated for us and returned back to us. We are going to print this result and compile the program and run it. We'll see our result has been calculated. Let's do a quick revision. This ellipsis notation, 3 dots, allows you to create functions with the variable number of arguments. But the necessary part is that you would have a starting point. You won't be able to calculate the number of arguments without this. And you are in control, and you would be controlling this function. Whenever you use the ellipsis notation, 3 dots for the number of variable number of arguments, the very first thing is you include this std_arg. std_arg is standard arguments to the function. Then you create a variable of data type called VList, which is variables list, variable arguments list. And after creating this list called arg or whatever name of your preference, you'll have to start it and then end it. When you start it, the first argument is the list. You work on the list of the arguments. The very first argument passed to the start, variable arguments start, would be the list, and the second argument would be your starting point, the starting variable, which is n here. You see, n, and here we have n. So this n is passed, and then within this start and end, with the end you don't tell the argument, the last argument. You just say va_n, and then you pass list to it, and within this block of code, you will be accessing every next argument. And it's not necessary to use loop. It depends on your requirement. If, for example, you start with an n and n doesn't make any sense and you always have 2 variables, then you're not going to use the ellipsis. But if you still want to use it, then you will be calling this function twice if you have 2 arguments. So this var actually gets the value from next upcoming argument from the list. This is your list, and casting it to data type that you provide, and returns back which we are adding to the result res variable, which is initially 0, and we are adding it to this, adding the value of upcoming variable, and then at the end we return it. I hope it does make sense to you. If it does not, or you have any question or complexity or any part that you did not understand or skipped, just let me know. If I can explain it over there in the forum, I'll do that. And if I have to create yet another explanation video, I'll do that as well for you. Thank you very much.